Now, it's different now from when Harry Truman tried it, and it's different now from when I tried it, because people have figured this out. The other day, one of those interminable press conferences occurred in Washington, where people stand up and say, I'm for this, that, or the other thing. But it was highly unusual because there was the following list of participants: AT&T and its union, the communication workers; Intel, the high-tech company; and Kelly Services, the provider of part-time employees; Walmart, the biggest non-union company in America; and the Service Employees International Union, the most liberal public employee union in the United States, stood together and said, we want universal health care, and these are the principles we all agree on. Harry Truman didn't have it, and neither did I. And why? I'm just saying, if you want an automobile industry in America, we got to do this. I think I'm pretty good at running things. I don't think that I could take over General Motors under current circumstances, which means you have to spot Toyota $1,400 a car and health care costs and beat Toyota in the marketplace. So if Harry Truman were here, he would say, I tried to do it and failed. So did Jimmy Carter, so did Richard Nixon, and so did Bill Clinton. He at least got a bill out of committee. Nobody else ever did that. But we all failed. But now is the time. Franklin Roosevelt did things that Teddy Roosevelt first proposed. Democracy takes a long time to get it right sometimes. But home improvement is our constant mission. On income inequality, the best way to do it is to find a source of new jobs, and the best way to do that is to make a serious commitment to a clean, independent energy future, which helps our national security and fights climate change. And so Harry Truman was always reading, always learning. If he were here, he would tell you, I've been reading up on this, and it's not true that you have to put more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere to get rich, stay rich, or grow richer. It was true in the industrial era. It is not true now. The great French writer Victor Hugo once said, there's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. Martin Luther King used to quote him all over America in advocating for civil rights. We ought to adopt the flip side. There is nothing more destructive than an idea whose time has come and gone, and nobody will recognize it. So, you don't have to take my word for this. One of our NATO allies, one of our strongest allies in Europe, is Denmark. In the last few years, Denmark has grown its economy by 50%. How much do you suppose, how much more energy do you think they had to use to grow their economy by 50%? Answer, 0. Not 1 watt of electricity more. Meanwhile, their greenhouse gases were reduced because now they produce 22% of their electricity from wind. The United Kingdom, our closest ally in Europe, with the economy most like ours, has only one huge difference. Their unemployment rate's about what ours is, but unlike America in this decade, their median wages are going up and they've had no increase in inequality. And there is only one plausible explanation. When I negotiated with Al Gore and a man named Stu Eisenstadt the Kyoto Climate Change Treaty, I thought it was pretty weak, but it was the best we could do. But you would have thought that I had called for an end to civilization as we know it. Even before President Bush rejected it, the Senate voted against it 95-0. It's the only bill I ever lost before I actually sent it to Congress. Usually at least they'd wait for me to send it up before they batted it down. Oh, and all the things that were said, I mean, it was horrible. You know, Bill Clinton is crazy, and, you know, he drank Al Gore's Kool-Aid, and, you know, I heard it all. Now, what did our friends in Britain say? They said, we kind of like this Kyoto Treaty. but it's really too weak. So we think we will beat the targets by 25 to 50%, and they're going to. So last year, the current Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, who was then the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the equivalent of the Treasury Secretary, put out a report on how come Britain had rising wages and no increase in inequality. Because they were going to beat their Kyoto targets by 25 to 50%, and it created massive numbers of new jobs in clean fuels and energy efficiency and new technologies, and he documented by category how many had been created. And it would be the same thing here. If we got around in everything but jet airplanes on biofuels or hybrid cars, if we retrofitted every building with efficient lighting, there's a bill in the Congress today that simply says in 10 years you can't use any more incandescent light bulbs. If it passes, you know what will happen? Listen, this passes. It means that America will lose the need for 80 coal-fired power plants. Just that one deal. 80. I'm working with a bunch of cities around the world, 40 of them on 5 continents, to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, and my mission is to create jobs, not cost jobs, to grow incomes, not shrink them. So we're starting with fixing the buildings, lights, glass, where the electricity will promote it, automatic temperature and lighting controls, where it's feasible, better insulation, and everywhere we can, green roofs to cut the heat on the roof in the summertime. Now, in Independence, Missouri, on a 90-degree day, if you've got an old-fashioned building with a flat roof that has tar in the cover, after the sun's been shining for 2 hours, the temperature will reach 150 degrees to the touch. If you seal the roof so it won't leak and put sod down, and then maybe a few other things depending on what it'll hold, you can cut the roof temperature to 80 degrees. That lower than the outside air. That dramatically reduces the air conditioning demand, dramatically reducing the utility bills of everybody in the building. And this is a job that cannot be outsourced. I mean, somebody's got to be standing on the roof when you put the sod down. New York City has 950,000 buildings. Do you have any idea how many jobs we can create for people that don't have college degrees just in retrofitting these buildings? So we could create more jobs in more American states, in more different kinds of communities than we have created since we fully mobilized for World War II if we took this seriously. And we could get rid of this inequality problem for at least a decade, by which time some new opportunity will have presented itself. Mr. Truman, a book reader, would know this, same way he knew those other things at the end of World War II. Taking a job for which rationally he could not possibly have been completely prepared. But he was. So, security, partners, home improvement. This last, I think, is the most important of all. Harry Truman was a guy who was helping to run a family farm till he was 32 years old, who was, I think, 50 when he was elected to the Senate, maybe older. But he understood something that you would have expected only someone who had traveled the world, lived in many different cultures, had a much more superficially sophisticated life to understand. If he wanted to present himself as every man, which he did adroitly in politics, he had to respect every man and woman. I mean, Why did he take all the heat to integrate the military in the Federal Employment Service? Didn't have to do it to get elected. He did it because he thought it was right. Why did he really care so much about, I get why he wanted to do the Marshall Plan. We needed Europe as a counterweight to communism. But the Truman Doctrine helped all these little countries that a more narrow-minded person would not have seen as critical to our security, but he thought those people were entitled to freedom. The central challenges of the world today are all related to the last thing I said about community. More than opportunity and more than a responsibility for the success of the community, there is whether you belong or not. What is your sense of identity? How can you be faithful to your religion, to your politics, to your culture, to your race, to your history, and be part of larger and larger and larger units? Only if you believe your differences are important and aid the search for truth, but our common humanity matters more. Harry Truman knew that in the fiber of his bones. You look at every place in the world today, there is a problem. People think their differences are more important than their common humanity. What's the biggest story out of the Middle East today, except for Iraq? The brutal fight going on between Hamas and Fatah in the Palestinian territories. Big story, 90 people killed, and Hamas wins this magnificent military victory and seizes the Fatah security headquarters. The Fatah security headquarters is about 1/6 the size of this room. It ain't that big a deal. And I don't mean that to trivialize it. I mean, they don't even have time to fight the Israelis anymore. They're too busy trying to devour each other. Meanwhile, the people get poorer and poorer and poorer. I'm convinced there are no poor Palestinians anywhere on earth except in the Palestinian territories. I've got a lot of Palestinian friends. Every Palestinian, this is not an exaggeration, every Palestinian I personally know is a college professor or a millionaire, except for the ones I know who live in the Middle East. They have the highest per capita income in Ecuador. They dominate the flower trade in Chile. If these people would get together with the Israelis within 10 years, the economic center of power in the Middle East would move away from the oil countries to the Israeli-Palestinian partnership. But they're fighting over a building that would fit within this room and everybody else could still be here. I don't know if you've ever been to Gaza, but Gaza, by far poorer than the West Bank, has 46 kilometers of straight, flat, broad, breathtakingly beautiful beach on the Mediterranean. Better than the south of France. The only difference is they're fighting over an old building in Gaza and they're pulling yachts up in the south of France. Everywhere in the world, think about this. Why did those people in Great Britain do this? Why did those other British citizens set off those bombs on the bus and in the subways? Because they felt they did not belong. They had a prior sense of identity, which made them dehumanize their fellow citizens. It was psychologically almost rougher for them than it was for America on 9/11. I mean, at least we were invaded. I read all those heartbreaking articles in Britain saying, I don't get this. Our kids played together. We went to sporting events together. We ate on the weekends together. We worked together for years. I never had any idea they hated us this much. All of our brains are hardwired to make distinctions. Otherwise, we couldn't survive. Thinking would be impossible if you couldn't make distinctions. You have to put reality in little boxes, right? You know the difference between a man and a woman, and tall and short, and wide and thin, and liberal and conservative, and scientist and a doctor. And all of us, we think in distinctions. We have to. But when we get to the point where we believe life is all about those distinctions, we cannot live in a globally interdependent environment. We can't. Truman knew that somehow in the fiber of his bones, that you couldn't be every man unless you cared about every man. So I believe one of the most important things we can do as Americans, while we have our security, while we're always prepared to defend, while we fight when we have to, while we're actually building more partners and fewer terrorists and improving things at home, we have to be working on the way people think and feel. It's not just thinking, it's feeling. We're all hardwired through millennia of development to recognize difference. We have to learn to appreciate common humanity. One of the countries I work in Africa, with my AIDS program, have the most amazing greeting. People meet each other walking along mountain passes, and they'll say, "Hello, how are you? Good morning." But the response is not, "I'm fine, how are you?" or "hello." The response in English is, "I see you." Think about that. It automatically confers dignity. It automatically establishes common humanity. You think about all the people we never see. Somebody's going to have to come in here and clean up after us when we leave today. 5 will get you 10. A bunch of the people that do this work think nobody ever sees them. When the human genome was sequenced in 2000, opening up the prospect that we could find cures for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, diabetes, all these other problems, as a layperson, to me, the most interesting thing was when the scientists came and briefed me, they said, "This is amazing. There's 3 billion genomes in every human body, and we are all genetically 99.9% the same." I mean, look around this room. It's unbelievable. Every difference you can see in skin color, gender, hair color, body type, you name it, it's all rooted in 0.1% of our difference. In a way, it's great. I mean, this big brain that we all have, the thing that has given us all the creativity and the progress in human life was the application of the brain to that 0.1%. But how arrogant we are when almost all of us, forget about the terrorists, almost all of us spend 90% of our time or more thinking about that 0.1%, don't we? I do. I wish I weren't 60, but at least I'm not 61 yet. I wish my hair weren't so white, but at least I still got some. Right? We all do this, don't we? Every day, you think about it when you leave here. Just instinctively, we are. So how can we be surprised that a certain small percentage of people who share this earth with us would be so wigged out they'd think that's all there was to life? That 0.1%. And how arrogant. And why do we have to have something terrible happen before we see that? When I was doing all this tsunami work, I went to Indonesia one time, and we still had 40,000 people living in these tent cities. It is way hot there, much hotter than here, much muggier than here. And I had to go to this tent city and see these people. They were just miserable. It made me sick. I couldn't get them out. It was just like anytime you have a disaster, getting the housing is the hardest thing to do. So I get out at this tent city, and each one of them had elected a leader. So the elected leader was there with his wife and son to meet me, along with my interpreter, this lovely young Indonesian girl who'd been a television person, and she fell in love with the tsunami work and became an interpreter. So I met the man and his wife. They were smiling, and they introduced me to their son, and I looked down at this child, and I literally gasped. He was so beautiful. And I said to this girl, I said, I don't know if I've ever seen a more beautiful child. And the young woman said, yes, he is very, very beautiful. And before the tsunami, he had 9 brothers and sisters, and they're all gone. So the woman and the boy, they took their leave, and the father who had lost 9 of his children took me around through this camp with a smile on his face, never said a word about it, no self-pity, only talking to me about what those people needed and what he wanted me to fix. Just in the moment. And I was overwhelmed with admiration for him. So we go through the tour, and the last stop is the health clinic. And I saw maternal and child health work, and it was really impressive. And then all of a sudden I looked up, and there was his wife, who had lost 9 of her children, holding this 2-day-old baby. Now, I'm almost hesitant to say this in an American crowd, but in Indonesian culture, when a woman has a baby, she gets to go to bed for 40 days and be waited on hand and foot. And on the 41st day, she gets up and they name the kid. Pretty good deal, right? So anyway, this baby was a couple days old. And this mother who'd lost 9 of her own children was holding this baby with a smile on her face, saying, "This is our newest child. And in honor of your visit, we want you to name him." So I said, "Is there a word in your language for new beginnings?" And they talked, the lady and the interpreter, and then the interpreter looks at me and she said, "Yeah, lucky for you. In our language, the word dawn is a boy's name, not a girl's." The mother says, "We will name this boy Dawn, and he will symbolize our new beginning." Now, here's why I told you the story. Why do we have to see or visualize somebody who lost 9 of their 10 kids, cherish the one they had left, and had the courage to hold another woman's baby and call it Dawn, to realize whatever differences we had in common with those people, 100% of whom were Muslim, by the way, whatever differences we had are as nothing compared to what we have in common. We get it when something bad happens. Just like the world got it for Harry Truman because they had the communist threat hanging out there. Or in a humorous way, sort of, the world got it in that movie Independence Day. We all got together because we were finally threatened from outer space. We have to learn to live without that. We don't have the one thing Harry Truman had going for him when he put all this together. Everybody had memories of World War II fresh and the Cold War staring them in the face, and they got it. We have to do it the way Harry Truman did. We have to think and feel and imagine. And we have to learn to rewire ourselves, not to give up our differences, not to stop appreciating them, not to stop realizing that we got to air them to make any progress at all, but to know we have to allocate more of our time and our life and our energy to the other 99.9% of our makeup, to the common humanity which makes the use of our differences worthwhile. Mr. Truman left us quite a legacy. What we owe him is to take his legacy to make sure our grandchildren can be here celebrating the 100th anniversary of his library and his service. Thank you very much.